Here is Jerry Pennick, the director of the Federation's Land Assistance Fund.
We see right now there's going to have to be a part 1, 2, and 3. I usually get on John by going on and on his reports, but you had my attention tonight, John. I have to give it to you. I learned a lot from your discussion. And as much as you write, John, I know you've written some of this down. I know you have, huh? All right, okay, because somebody's going to write our history if we don't write it. So somebody else is going to write it. And Carol, I can understand why everybody left, but on that Garden of Eden, we need to go back to the future. Not moving out here. Now, I don't want people to move out here on trailers.
Not a bad idea.
But I'm talking about that training that we had before, those demonstration projects and all of that. We need to do a lot more of that. And then there's one other thing that I don't know who caught it or not, but there's one unique thing that John, Ralph, and Carolyn talked about, is that most of us, if not all of us, were under 30. We were all young people during this period, except Ralph.
I was a baby. I was 30.
But we were all under 30. Even Charles, as executive director, he was under 30. Everybody was under 30. So that's a challenge to the young people to take the baton, and it's a challenge to the old people to turn it loose. But we can't turn it loose unless somebody is willing to take it. But that's one thing I tell everybody. I tell Cornelius that. I tell everybody all the time that we were all under 30s when we were doing this. Everybody was under 30. Everybody was. But see, that's another thing we have too. We have our own time. We have our own time. We don't go by traditional time. That's where we're getting to now. But that's going to, like I said, that's going to take a longer. So we're going to have a part 2. We're going to have a part 2. But briefly, though, you have the Federation of Southern Cooperatives Land Assistance Fund. The Land Assistance Fund was the Emergency Land Fund initially. Just like the Federation, the Emergency Land Fund got its start also in Atlanta. But at Clark Atlanta University is where it first got started. But even before then, about 5 years ago, I had a fellowship to do a writing project, so I started doing some research on the Emergency Land Fund. And I found out that back in the early 1960s, there was a conference held in Detroit, Michigan. And out of that conference came the Black Manifesto. And from the Black Manifesto, it demanded like $200 million for African Americans in the rural South to develop co-ops, to form a land bank, and to do other things. That didn't come through naturally. They didn't get that. But then a later meeting was held at Clark Atlanta University, and that was held really by the Black Economic Research Center, Dr. Robert S. Brown, who was the head of the Black Economic Research Center. And I think at that time he may have been the only African-American economist in the country, black economist in the country. And we had a meeting at Clark Atlanta University, and some of the people from the conference in Detroit came to that meeting. And they wanted to focus then on land as an economic development tool and to save African American owned land. So they needed to find out exactly how much land was owned by African Americans, where it was owned, and how it was held. So the Black Economic Research Center commissioned a study to go out and do this kind of research in the South. And the name of that study was Only 6 Million Acres. That was the first in-depth study of African American owned land in the country that had ever been done. And at the end, that's what you found, that blacks owned only 6 million acres at that time in the late 1960s, from a high of 15 million acres in the early 1900s. So we had lost over half of our land ownership over that period of time. In that study, it also gave recommendations of what needed to be done, how to deal with the situation, how to turn it around. And with an anonymous gift at that time of $1 million that was given to Dr. Brown, he decided to form an organization. He called it the Emergency Land Fund. And from the Emergency Land Fund, he came down, hired staff in the same states with the Federation is. The Federation is more economic development. The Land Fund was just land retention, basically saving black-owned land through legal assistance and financial assistance. Those are the two things we had. We also had a revolving loan fund at the time, where we would go in and if land was being lost through a tax sale or petition sale, we would go in and lend the owner the money. They could bid on the land and save the land that way. One of the first employees was Michael Figures, who was later became a state senator here in Alabama from Mobile. Hank Sanders was on the board. So you remember Hank Sanders? He's been here a lot. He was on one of the first board members. His wife was one of the attorneys that we worked with, Rose Sanders. Alvarez Farrellette from Louisiana, the late Alvarez Farrellette, Fred Bennett from here in Alabama. These were just some of the initial people with the Emergency Land Fund. As I said, we had a revolving loan fund, we had a legal team, we had students, we had interns, we had community organizers, county contacts working out in the counties. We would go in and bid on land, give families money, lend them money to bid on land. Unfortunately, at the time, and we still suffer from this today, we would lend people money to bid on the land, we would save the land, they wouldn't pay us back, and we wouldn't foreclose. So eventually, the revolving loan fund was eaten up. But we were innovative. Just because we didn't have any money didn't mean that we wouldn't go out and bid on the land anyway. So sometimes we would show up at courthouses and bid on the land, didn't have the money, but we would run the bid up. We would make sure we could run the bid up so the families could get at least what the money was worth. If we had won, now we would have been in hell of a fix if we had won the bid. But fortunately, we never did win, but we did run the prices up. Then we had lawyers who would go out and do workshops, and we had also attorneys who would go to court and challenge these petition sales and tax sales and other tax sales. We had one of our biggest things was to have community volunteers. We called them county contacts at the time. In each county, we had at least one or two people who went through a training, in-depth training on how to provide emergency assistance around land. They would read the newspapers every month to see whose land was being sold. They would come together and pool their resources, and they would go to the tax sales and buy up land and hold it and sell it back to the landowners at some point if they wanted to buy it, or they would hold the land and sell it to someone else, an African American, just keeping the land within the community. We also got into the political process, policy and legislation. In Alabama with Mike Figures and a couple other people, we passed the first air property legislation in the country that's aimed at dealing with the problems of petition sales. We also formed an organization called the National Association of Landowners. Some of you may remember it. We had state offices in, I think, 8 states. We had 4,000 paid members at the time, which was unique. It was hoped that the National Association of Landowners would eventually take over the Emergency Land Fund. But that's when everybody, the Federation and the Land Fund began to run into financial difficulties, much like we are today. We went through was that a recession back then or what?
It wasn't none of now.
But it was close. It was close. But we had been talking, John, I remember John and me and Joe Brooks and Charles and other people, Ralph and other people, we had been talking about why don't we come together? We were going to the same funding sources. We were competing against each other for money. And we both were broke at the time, in debt. So we figured that it would be time for maybe we could come together as one organization and be a bigger and better organization, serve more people, bring the expertise from each organization together, and that's how the Federation of Southern Cooperatives Land Assistance Fund was formed. And that's the short version. There's a lot more to be told. I too, John, I'm writing a little on the Emergency Land Fund. Maybe we can get together and put all this together with pictures. Another thing, we talked this morning about the Kellogg Racial Healing Grant. One of the things, if we get that money, one of the things that we're going to do, we have in that thing, is to do some oral histories. We want to go out and interview people in these areas that Carolyn and John was talking about. And I don't mean the people like the Andrew Youngs and the C.T. Vivian. I mean the people that were out there that nobody knows about it, but really had an impact in those areas. If we get this grant, that's one of the things that we're going to do, and also record it visually as we interview these people. But even if we don't get that grant, this is something that we need to do anyway, because a lot of the people that Carolyn and John and Ralph have talked about, and a lot of people that I've talked about and we'll talk about, they're dead now. And nobody got that history. Nobody heard from them. Nobody talked to them, interviewed them. And we don't need to lose that. So hopefully, Ralph, one of the things we're going to do, if we don't get this grant, we're going to get some money from somewhere to get this history. Because again, if we don't write it, somebody else is going to write it, and they're not going to write it like we would. It won't be the same.